Hi, welcome to the Diablo podcast. We are back. This is part 2 of the 2-part mega experience of Gamescom 2013. I just recorded show 1 with Junior Mint and Muggs. I am now back with Azzure.
Hello.
And Neinball.
Oh, hi.
And we are covering all different topics from show 1. I just talked about, I'm telling them as well, they don't even know this yet. We talked a lot about Paragon 2.0 and Loot 2.0 and a little bit about the Crusader. So if either of you guys, Neinball and Azzure, have anything you're dying to say about Paragon level and Loot 2.0, we can go into that very briefly, but it's kind of been covered already, so sorry. We're mostly, on this show, going to talk about the story and a little bit about some loot stuff and legendary items somewhat, and a lot about Methangel and Act 5 setting and Imperius and Magda and the lack of PvP. And we have a WoW expert, so we can talk about Transmog.
Yes.
The Mogarifinator, anyway. So, just as a brief intro, what have you guys been doing in the game lately? You've been on the podcast for a long time, Azzure. When were you last on the show, and what have you been up to in Diablo 3? And have you come crawling back with your tail between your legs now that Reaper of Souls has drawn you back in?
Well, I haven't been playing Diablo for a while. I've actually just come back after the expansion announcement, like a lot of other people, I guess. But yeah, it's been a long time since I've been on the podcast. Haven't really done too much with Diablo. I wouldn't say I stopped playing, but I lost a bit of interest, and I sort of log on it every now and then. But yeah, look, like a lot of other people, I think I haven't been playing as much as I used to, and I've sort of come back quite recently after the ROS stuff, and kind of looking forward to that. So I will be definitely buying it, no matter sort of how bad it looks or how good it looks. I'll definitely give it a go.
And you were on the show just quite recently, Neinball, talking about a lot of story stuff, and we're talking about that again here in a little bit. Has the announcement of the Reaper of Souls changed your experience and your goals and your happiness, and you're ready to roll?
Yeah, I think it's at least given me a little bit more focus to try and work on the Paragon level, so I'm more prepared for the expansion.
And how many Paragon 100s do you have right now, and how many do you hope to have by the expansion?
0 and 10.
You have your work cut out for you.
Yes.
And this is in hardcore you're playing only now?
Yeah, I recently got I got my Demon Hunter to 60 when I was on the podcast last time, now up to Paragon level 11, so I think I'm on track of making it there.
I think actually I got your Demon Hunter to 60, but we don't need to go into that topic.
This is true.
I seem to recall a shadow somewhere several rooms behind me in the Keep 2 for about 3 games in a row, but that could have been just a bad memory.
Nah, it didn't happen.
And you've also gone to hardcore lately, Azzure. Have you had course to regret that yet?
I haven't died yet, so that's always good. I don't think I would ever go back to softcore. I think Xanth sort of said, once you go to hardcore, you don't really look back. I think he's right about that. It seems a lot more like what I expect a Diablo game to be. So the economy is a bit better, itemization's a bit more difficult to get. Things aren't so easily accessible, which is to me a very big plus. But yeah, I definitely won't be going back to SC.
So getting on to the topics here. Crusader, what did you guys think? Your first impressions. You can go first, Azzure, because we can barely hear you.
I liked it. I always thought they would do a Paladin. This is close enough, I guess. Yeah, look, it's certainly the class that's missing. There's really no shield bearing. There was already a strength class. I always knew there would be a second strength class, matching the other, 2 dex class 2 ints. So it was quite expected, and he looked pretty good so far from the videos. It looks like he's got a lot of similarities with the Paladin, so that should. I always love the Paladin D2.
I think he's pretty interesting. He's got a diverse skill set, so he can be melee or ranged. So that's pretty nice. Just unstoppable juggernaut. He's strength based, so he's going to have a ton of armor, and then he gets increased attack power based on his armor. Passives that we saw, although that could of course change between now and the beta, and then between the beta and live. But he looks like a lot of fun. Looks like he fills like a little niche that doesn't exist, because you have your like throw barbs and beacon, or what was it, the Hand of Yatar monks, and that's about it as far as the melee ranged hybrid.
I made this point on the previous podcast, and I made it on the site a couple of places, so I don't want to belabor it, but I think that it seemed like the first reveal of it, I thought it was a little anticlimactic. I wasn't real. I'm like, yeah, great, another tank with a shield. And then as I listened to what the developers were saying, they were talking about, how it was really new in the shield. I'm like, wait, what? And I was thinking, oh yeah, from the softcore point of view, no one ever
Yeah.
uses shields. I mean, every monk and barb is either dual wielding or using a scorn, and sometimes both if they can cheat it enough to do that. But for me, and playing only hardcore, my main has been a monk and with a shield for a long time, and I see lots of barbs with shields. And I'm like, oh, this is boring, another shield bearer. But obviously, from softcore, it's very different. And of course, there's more to him than just the fact that he's using a sword board. But it did seem like like their announcement was very much from the softcore perspective of, no one's ever seen a shield in Diablo 3.
Yeah,
This is awesome.
no,
and new.
that does actually bring up the one problem that I had with the class. When they announced it and they said that it was going to be sword and board, at first I thought it was going to be awesome. It's actually going to make a use like for shields and softcore, like you said. And then in the playthrough, they showed that one of his class items is a shield. So there's going to be Crusader only shields. They're going to be class items, which are more than likely going to be the ones that have his class skill affixes on it. And so all the Crusaders are only going to be using the Crusader only shields, making all the other shields in softcore still completely useless.
I do hope they have some better shields, though. I mean, it's annoying. The only useful legendary shield is a storm shield, and that's only for barbs because it has strength on it all the time. So be nice. It's annoying that monks use shields all the time in hardcore, and there's really no reason to even look at a legendary. And don't mention ivory towers. Hallowed defenders can be good. There's some people that sell those, but generally you're pretty much looking at rares. It's weird that there's just one item type that there's no chance you'll ever have a legendary of any use for one class who uses it all the time. But maybe soon, maybe later. We're going to get mostly into story stuff later, but we did get a little bit of story about the Crusader here, and I was a little. It seemed like it's just sort of a warmed over paladin. It's a paladin, but he's like a special paladin. Can you shed any more light on that Neinball? Why is he more special than your
Well,
average
it seems
special?
that they're the Delta Force of the Paladins. That the story that we've been given so far, because they've never existed in lore up until this point, was just that Rackus, the first king of Westmarch, kind of came through the Western Kingdoms, or they weren't the Western Kingdoms at that point. It was just Kandurus, and brought the Zachariam faith across from Kyrgyzstan, and the Paladins were the the holy warriors that came with them in order to set up their faith. And the Crusaders are supposed to be the elite sect of the Paladins. They, for some reason, went back east, back to Kyrgyzstan or wherever, and then just now have been resummoned back. And there's apparently, in the lore, there's only a set number of Crusaders. There's only like 100 Crusaders, and every single one of them takes a single apprentice, and when the master dies, the apprentice then takes his armor, shield, and his name and carries on and gets a new apprentice. So there's only ever been like the set number of Crusaders ever in existence. So they're a very elite, hardcore group.
Which has been happily Metconned into existence now that we need them.
Exactly.
We'll get to more story in a minute. I wanted to get a little bit about, just the Crusader. We were talking previously, and there was a lot of speculation what the sixth class would be. And obviously the strength thing was kind of an expectation.
Definitely, in order to bring parity
Unless
across all the stat usage.
Yeah, unless you were like me and naively thought maybe they would ditch the entire attribute system and do a whole new thing, but obviously that didn't happen. But there was a lot of speculation we would get like a druid shapeshifter with that demonic arm of the demon hunter concept art
that
and
was
stuff.
one that I had been speculating for a very long time and couldn't have been further from the truth.
And those seemed a lot more interesting to me than just a paladin who's a special forces paladin. I was a little disappointed that it wasn't something more creative and visually exciting instead of the Black Knight.
And it also, I mean, with what we know of the story that they're going for now, which of course, like you said, we'll talk about later, that still would have worked thematically in the game, being a half demon, so that'd be 3/4 demon or whatever it is. But the human demon hybrid would fit really well with what they're trying to push forth in the story and the motivations behind Malthael. Trying to
he'd be really
exactly
pissed.
So I mean that.
Yeah, he'd kill you twice.
That would be something that would have worked well had they done that, and still would have kind of filled the niche though. Maybe the demonic arm would have been big and beefy, and that's the one that you hold the shield with to make it a shield class.
Maybe it's a shield all by itself. It's like a bone protrusion.
Maybe like a fallen paladin or something. Because you remember in D2, the Act 3, how sort of everyone got corrupted in Act 3? That would have been cool.
Is the follower, the Templar, going to have like total penis envy now?
I would assume so.
This is like his god, like joining the game. They said they're going to develop a lot more of the story of the follower. So I'm just kind of I I hate to admit that I'm actually curious what he's going to say, but I'm kind of curious what the Templar is going to say when he first meets him. He's like, "Oh my God, glorious!" Blah blah
It'll
blah.
surely be something lame.
Yeah, pretty much like that. Even lamer than what I just said. Okay. Thing we didn't really get to in the other topic, in the other show, a lot of stuff about loot and improvements to loot, and one of the things that's come up in commentary conversations that you're also useful for, Neinball, because you play WoW. It's your cross to bear, but it's also
Hi.
useful in this case. Is every time there's an expansion of an RPG, all of the current loot becomes immediately devalued, or largely or completely, and then everybody wants the new stuff that's much better. And I just assumed that was sort of an expected and understood thing, but it seems like maybe in Diablo 3, because of the real money auction house, people are feeling a little bit like, hey, you guys encouraged me to spend real money on this gear, and now your expansion's coming out, and it's going to have level 70 stuff, and all my Mimpos and Echoing Furies are going to be trash now. So should they just suck it up and accept it, or do they have an argument? What do you think from based on WoW? What's your name, Nineball?
Oh, at least you remembered it. That's the important part. I mean, just
I was wait 1 sec. I was talking to Holy Knight in Game Loss, who also plays WoW, and he said there actually are people in WoW who complain about this every expansion. So
oh
is that your
yeah. I mean,
experience?
there's people that for whatever reason, and people will complain because in the expansions, the first expansion that they did, all of your in-game gear was replaced like immediately. Stepping into the new zone, you kill a creature, green drops, and then suddenly it's upgrading something that you rated, you know, 20 25 hours a week in order to get this piece of gear, and you now have an instant upgrade. And people complained a lot because they didn't want to feel that all the work that they had just put in at the end of the prior expansion is just going to be completely useless. They wanted to at least get to the end game before they started replacing their items from the previous end game. And then they went and did that in the next expansion, Wrath of the Lich King, and then everyone complained because they didn't get their upgrades quick enough. So I don't think that's going to be there's any way that you're going to be able to please anyone with that. But I am still surprised that people have some sort of expectation that the items that they got are still going to be useful in an expansion.
And Azzure, you didn't really play that much Diablo 3 to get super high quality in-game gear. Are you now grateful that you didn't waste all that time buying stuff that would have been garbage, and you can just start from fresh almost and get
Well,
new
no,
stuff?
I would have preferred to have items I actually cared about, like a good item system. Um,
Well, you should have played it 1,000 hours then. What do you
nah,
want?
look, it's. I think back to what Nineball was saying. I think the expectation by now, people should know that's going to happen, and I think it's a bit of a psychological effect because most people want to have better brand new items, but they get upset when their current items sort of get devalued. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's an expansion. It's sort of it's sort of sequel to the game. You're going to end up getting new loot. Like that's part of the new features. You don't want to be stuck with the same gear, year after year. So I think it's a pretty nonsensical. People who have that sort of argument against it is pretty nonsensical because it's something that is actually fun. Not right away, but it's without imagine a new expansion pack without any new items, it would suck. So.
Yeah, and I mean, even just given your point of people that put money into the real money auction house and bought gear and now they're having it uh, be devalued going into the expansion. Well, it's been they could probably find an upgrade on the real money auction house from the thing that they spent 5 10 20 30 100 $250. There's going to be something else out there that's better, and so they already have that mentality. So it's just how much you're willing to spend and whether you feel as if you're getting your money's worth of the item at the time of purchase, knowing that there's always going to be something better that exists out there, because there is. I mean, even without the expansion, unless you got the completely perfect roll of the item, which practically doesn't exist. That it's just a certain expectation you should have just playing the game without an expansion.
I'm curious about the start of the first few weeks or months after the launch because we're going to see this crazy rush, this gold rush, literally in some cases, of here's a new thing. I found a level 68 legendary and it's got 2,000 DPS on one-handed. Oh my god, oh my god. And of course that'll be garbage in 6 months, but I recall I didn't really get I didn't get a high level 60 really quickly in D3. I was playing 3 different characters at once and sort of taking turns. And so there was this whole huge crazy rush, which you've talked about being part of Neinball, where you had to play a different class because you couldn't ever get through
Yeah.
Act 2 of Inferno. And we're hoping they're going to have a little better balance this time. And Act 5 is not going to be this incredible gear check wall, but it's going to be level 70. And maybe all of Inferno is going to be level 70 now. We don't know how they're going to rebalance the leveling curve, but it's going to be this crazy rush of trying to dump stuff you have now, trying to figure out what is still useful. Maybe you can use the the what's her face, the mystic to enchant some of your current gear and make it better. You know, it's okay. This would be great if it just had more damage. Maybe I can get the enchantress to fix this for me. Well, not the enchantress, but they had really got to be the enchantress that does enchants. But that's a different
Nah,
question.
that makes too
So
much
are you
sense.
guys eagerly? Yeah. So are we eagerly awaiting this? And are you going to furiously dump everything you own while you can still get gold for it and just sit there naked waiting for 6 months or 8 months or 12 months so you don't lose the
I mean,
value of your
I'll
current gear?
probably try and empty out everything in my stash. The the weeks coming up to the expansion, like once we have a release date. But until then, I mean, it doesn't really matter too much. Since I recently, switched to hardcore, I don't really have anything to write home about, so it doesn't impact me too much. I still hold on to some good gear, for when I'm going to level up my witch doctor, when I'm going to level up a barb, just so that way I have something to do. So I'm not going to be worried about it till it's almost here. And sure, the prices at that point are going to plummet just due to everyone trying to unload everything that they've got and no one wanting to buy anything going before the expansion itself. But that's something that I'm willing to take just because it doesn't affect me too much.
Look, the expansion is pretty far away if you think about it. It's going to be probably at least a year away. So, I mean,
Some people think
Well,
it's going to
the
be much
the
less than
official
that.
site
We'll
right
get.
now says coming 2014, and I mean
yeah.
Blizzard. There of course, Diablo 3 is like their one exception, saying that they wanted to have the beta at the end of 2011, and then we
Mm.
saw how much or they wanted to launch the game by the end of 2011, but
Yeah.
we don't really have the issues with the back end on BattleNet and things like that they're going to have to work and recode. It's just a couple systems, and I mean some of the big systems for the expansion, the Loot and the Paragon system. It seems as if they've been working on that for a long time, anyways, and so they're just then now kind of moving that over to be kind of quote unquote part of the expansion kit, even though it's going to be a free download for whether you buy the expansion or not prior to it. So there's not too much for them to do. The biggest thing is just going to be like the cinematics and the art assets. A lot of it is more or less done at this point, because otherwise it's just adding in strings for the new affixes and the new items.
It's fun to pretend.
Hints given that in BlizzCon there might be a few more features to showcase. So, for all we know, there might be a feature or two that wasn't ready to be showcased. It would be pointless for them to showcase it,
Yeah,
last week.
I did see
Something
some
a
of
bit
the
bigger,
interviews saying that there was going to be a couple new
more
things
info.
to be
Yeah.
announced at BlizzCon. There was one screenshot in one of the developer panels where they showed like you could set your mode, and it was set to adventure mode, and in that it was like exploration, Nephalem trials, and then bounties. And no one ever got to ask what bounties were, and they never answered it or
PvP
anything like
maybe.
that.
Yeah, that was a question I had. They said repeatedly no PvP yet,
Yeah,
not ready to make an announcement. And then they never said it's going to be forever, but they were very much like, well, we're
Hmm.
working on what we have now, and once we have a good system, we're going to announce it immediately. But I mean, from the way Josh answered that numerous times, I wouldn't be shocked if they rolled out PvP at BlizzCon. I don't expect it, but it wasn't like he said it's not going to happen until the next expansion after this
yeah,
one, and
they've
don't get your
got
hopes up.
something that they're working on. They're just not ready to debut it yet.
Mm. But if you recall, I mean, they kind of said that a long time ago, and it was going to be a content patch. I mean, even before the game was released, it was. I think it was a very similar sort of thing that was said, which is we really want to do something, but we just can't we don't have anything solid yet. Like everything we've tried, isn't good enough to ship. And I don't know, Josh. I mean, Josh could have been quite sneaky in not really revealing anything, because there's going to be a big announcement, but it did sound like they truly don't actually know what direction they're going to push ahead with PvP. But I would be very surprised if the expansion shipped without some significant PvP content.
You mean more than brawling?
What could
What,
you
what
want
could you
more?
want more than brawling? Brawling's awesome.
Look, at the minimum, I think they should at least combine some PvE content with PvP. Have things like in WoW, sort of like battleground type things. So it's not just 1-on-1 or 2 versus 2 or 3 versus 3. It's more like this big zone filled with players, and you just sort of. It's not even about balance. You just run around killing each other, and you might even fight each other for treasure goblins, and throw some treasure goblins in the middle of the battleground. Everyone's trying to kill the treasure goblins, but they're trying to kill each other. Stuff like that, I think, is good because it doesn't put a lot of pressure on Blizzard to actually balance PvP in a really intrinsic way. They can just sort of have this sort of PvE content thrown in the middle of a PvP environment, And that's what direction I was hoping they would pursue, because it's the easiest to balance, and it won't cause those issues of people whinging when they keep getting killed by a certain class and just complaining that class is overpowered, because it'll be too sort of chaotic to actually to make those kinds of balance claims.
Yeah, and I mean there was some really really high expectations for PvP in Diablo 3, both before and after launch. What is it? A very popular esports team, Team Evil Geniuses, Team EG. They hired someone to be kind of like an advisor for Diablo 3, expecting there to be a very popular, very big featured, PvP mentality, despite the fact that Jay Wilson had constantly said, we don't want it to be an esport, we're not going to balance it, but there's a lot of interest, professionally, for that going in, and even like some of the big streamers like Moldrin or whatever his name was, had put together these 5-player PvP teams, went out and farmed specific gear for it, just to get ready to go and start PvPing at a high level, and then we got brawling, and so a lot of the their teams fell apart and people stopped playing and such, but you know well, we'll see. There's a huge interest for it, and it's probably one of the biggest things that Blizzard is lacking at right now, and is that is the community is asking for.
So one thing we didn't get to mention on the first show is loot runs. They've talked about in game for everyone, as they say, and I think that is a good segue from the what are we going to see at BlizzCon stuff, because there's not in game for everyone at this point. There's loot runs and there's grinding. So I'm thinking there's going to be some more in-game stuff. But the thing with loot runs is it's a 15 or 20-minute game. You just sort of go into one dungeon. It's all totally randomized with the monsters and the layout, and you get some kind of big special boss at the end. And it seems like it'd be something you could do about 100 times in a row, and just keep racking up really good loot and good gear, and it's like a concentrated burst of fun. Are you guys down with that?
The way they design that, I think, is going to be very important, because if they simply design it as a randomized zone, no different to really what we look at right now, where we might do an Act 3 run. If they just sort of compartmentalize that and put it out, I won't be too pleased. I want something to be a bit more sort of structured, a bit like a horde mode, or at least give each sort of randomized area a sort of purpose, like an objective. Like if it's you might do a random sort of mode and it comes up as horde mode, and you don't really know what you're getting.
They are doing that, just not the loot runs. That's the Nephalem trials.
Yeah, those are Nephalem trials.
And when they first announced the loot runs, I was a bit taken back, because it looked like they were pushing the new item grind to these 15-20 minute play sessions, and that was going to be your preferred way of going through and grinding items or grinding loot. And if they made that too efficient, then what if I want to go and just play through the game? Do what they have right now for when you're farming items or Paragon levels and clearing Act 1 or Act 2 or Act 3, and just playing for an hour or two, or if I just want to clear the whole act or something along those lines. If they made that the loot runs too good, then I'm going to feel bad about going and doing some of the other ones, because I could just, instead of spending an hour and a half clearing Act 1, I could have done like 6, 7, 8 of these loot runs. But then they announced the Nephalem trials, and so that my one concern about it was kind of moot at that point, because they're adding things to reward you for going out and exploring. But now they have a separate system where if you only have 15 or 20 minutes, and you want to get something meaningful out of it, you can just go and do a loot run, which I think is great that they now have those choices.
I hope they'll have additional choices of longer term, if you want to play for 3 hours in the same game, that kind of thing. And it seems also like loot runs will probably be, they're loot runs, they're not EXP runs. So maybe there'll be not that many, maybe the experience is actually lessened in them, or they're just not they're not really what you would do for experience compared to just doing a normal game now. Because obviously they can't do everything the best in one game, otherwise no one will play any other game modes.
I don't think anyone has actually asked that question, or they haven't at least addressed it in any of the interviews that I've seen. The one thing that I did remember hearing in one of them was just the fact that you have to beat the boss at the end in order to keep any of the items that you collect in the loot run itself. So it seems that there might be like little objectives of the monsters might not drop as much loot, or there might only be loot off of the end boss, in order to actually collect it. So it could very well be that you get reduced XP or no XP from doing the loot run itself, which, if they make it worthwhile in terms of the amount of gear that you get from it, then that could also be nice.
It's going to be curious how those go with multiplayer, and also wondering how they'll work with Nephalem Valor stacks. I mean, they were speculating maybe those were out of the game entirely now, but you can actually see Nephalem Valor stacks on the guy in the Ninja video he posted today. So apparently those still exist, but I mean, if it resets, you can't be recharging every in every 15-minute game.
Well,
so does it carry over,
if the
or
loot run, say, is a separate system that you queue for, from the game menu, and not something that you actually do once you're in the game itself, then that could, since it's a little instance thing contained within itself, it can be balanced around the not having or having a ramp up of the Nephilim stacks themselves, where there's always going to be 5 elite packs before you get to the boss, and the boss is going to have an increased drop chance on gear, something along those lines.
and that could certainly work with the EXP. If you're not Nephalem Valor stacked up, then you're going to get a lot less EXP every time, and you need less drops along the way.
If it's going to be small little instance things outside of the game world, they could easily balance around that, the lack of or the ramp up for the Nephalem Valor. So not something I'm too concerned about.
So one other thing before we get to the story stuff, build changing legendaries, and the one they announced was that one that it spawns hydras when monsters die. And your forum thread took issue with that, Azzure. Why don't you fill us in on your thoughts there?
The problem I have with it, if they just showed that item and said this is a legendary item in the expansion, then fine. But they actually use that item as an example, showcasing their ideas on making build changing legendaries. But the problem with that is the item is actually not build changing at all. I mean, when you actually consider what it actually does not change anything with even itemization or build. So the effect is, for those who don't know, is when you kill a monster, there's a chance that a Hydra will sort of spawn out of its body and do a bit of damage, kind of no different to what you'd expect in the Hydra wizard spell. Now, 2 things about that. One, it's a wizard-only item, so you can either get Hydras by casting them or use this item, or both. So, even that effect, all it really does, it's no different to what our current legendaries do, which is sort of more gimmicky type effects, which is like Firewalkers, where they kind of just do a little bit of extra damage, leave a trail of fire, and a little bit of damage is done on top of that. So when you actually think about what that net effect is, it's just a passive DPS increase. It's a gimmick. It doesn't really change anything with the way you would build your character. You wouldn't get Hydra necessarily, or you wouldn't not use Hydra if you had that item. You wouldn't get Meteor, you wouldn't change any of your other skills, you wouldn't even change your itemization stats or anything like that. So to me, that example was a very poor example of how, the actual category that was being discussed at the time was build changing legendaries. And, that item is just not build changing at all. There is nothing that can be said that would change in your build or even in the itemization choices you make. And I just got a little bit upset that that's their idea for really fixing the boring legendaries problem.
Do you want to tell him why he's wrong?
No, this was actually one of the things Azzure and I talked at length about this last night, and this was one of the things that I agreed with him about, is that it really doesn't. I mean, it doesn't even require that you use Hydra, the skill, in order for that bonus to have an effect. Like he was saying, it doesn't really change much of anything. Now, if it had instead, say, when you cast Hydra, it will cast 2 of them, or it increases the maximum number of it, or even, say when you cast a Meteor, it will summon a Hydra of the responding damage type, at the impact center or whatever. Something like that would actually be something that would actually make you stop and think, well, this item is pretty useful, if I use the skill or change my bill around.
A good idea someone had in that same thread was even if they change that bonus to be the Hydras that spawn, actually every time they hit something, they give you Arcane Power back. That's a good example of something that actually would change your build, because if you use that item, you would suddenly have a lot more AP to use, which means you can actually get skills like Meteor, which are very heavy on AP, and that would actually have a net effect on your build. Whereas the way it is right now, it has absolutely no effect. It's just passive DPS.
Or there could be another item that would give you bonus AP every time you cast a Hydra, or every time you have one Hydra active, something like that.
I'm annoyed that they use that as an example of build changing, because it kind of rubbed us rubbed us the wrong way because we're quite sensitive to having such crappy legendaries for so long, and the way the game shipped and all that, and the fact that a lot of people raised concerns before the game shipped about legendaries, and they still ship them the way they were. So there's a lot of, I think, built up anger, and it makes it worse when their new solution is really not a solution at all.
So what if they had said, it's like you're taking build changing very literally, which of course I guess is reasonable since he did say build changing, but if it said really cool legendary that does a little bit more than any legendaries in the game do now in terms of
Yeah,
proc effects, you'd be like,
yeah,
okay, I guess that's
exactly.
true,
I
but I want
wouldn't
more.
necessarily have a problem with him using that, but the fact that that was his primary example of build changing legendaries, that's why I came to this conclusion, and I'm quite, I'm not happy about it. Look, even the stats themselves, I wasn't happy with, because if you looked at the actual item, all it's got is like plus a crapload of int, and it's got this like effect, and that's it. Like, it doesn't really change. All it is it's a gimmick. It really is. It doesn't actually have any cool new stats. There's no new plus 10% of fire damage, or anything that at least would have some resemblance to a build changing affix. There's just nothing. It's just the complete linear same stuff we've been seeing year after year or month after month.
Well, that became cheerful in the end there. Okay, anyway, so we're getting to story now. I've been saving story for last because if you're listening and all you care about is item, PLZ, gib, potal, you can quit now. But for those of us who are more sophisticated and mature and Australian, we're going to talk about the story stuff. And obviously it's like the biggest plug of the expansion was Mathiel, or as I'm calling him, Meth Angel. Or also you can do Mathy or Malty. What do you think he prefers,
I believe
Neinball?
it's
Is that covered in the Book
Malthael.
of Cain?
Malthy.
Melty?
Malthy?
Malty?
Malthy could be a good
Okay,
one.
anyway. He's like big and mysterious, and he has like big sickles, and he like kills people and stuff. And then he almost kills Tyrael, but then he gets his memory out of his head and finds out that Voldemort actually killed his mother. I like that part. That was the best
Wait,
thing in the
what?
whole cinematic, really. It's like they use the exact same visuals of Harry
I
Potter's
didn't even make
memory
that
things, but
connection.
that's a
Thank you
different
for
topic.
ruining it for me.
Yeah.
So he was like the big plug. They barely even showed the Crusader at the start. It's like, oh, here's this big scary angel, and he's like killing people, and he's got his sickles and stuff. So you wrote a cool thing about the lore that I'm going to be posting on the site probably on Monday or Tuesday, which will be before this podcast. So I'm now giving a retrospective flashback in the future. And in it, you described in great detail a lot of really cool stuff. But in the interest of time on the podcast, can you give a very brief description of who Malty is and where he came
Okay,
from and why he's a
Malty.
badass?
Um, there's the first time that we see him, and then there's his beginnings in lore. So when we first see him, it's the kind of the end of the Sin War, which is a few hundred years before the events of Diablo and Diablo II, and he's just this dark, brooding, silent character that just has the look of the Angel of Death, clad in black robes. He's wielding sickles, and the sound of his voice just, gives the impression and visions of death on any of the mortals that hear him speak. Um, and then you fast forward to like the next BlizzCon after that book was released. This was, I believe, 2007, 2006 or 2007. And then they're going through and saying, oh, well, he's the Archangel of Wisdom. He's not the Archangel of Death. And then they start actually giving concept art for him, and he's wielding sickles. He's covered in mummy wrappings instead of having wings. It's actually rune covered bandages for his wings instead. He's got spikes on his shoulders. He's gaunt skeletal figure, and it's like, oh yeah, this guy is he's wisdom, not death. And it's like, I don't believe you. Then in the Book of Cain, they even make it so that way he's not just the Archangel of Wisdom; he's the leader of the Anguirus Council. So he's more or less he's the leader of the council that leads heaven. So he's almost the leader of all of heaven and the heavenly host. So it also goes into his actual backstory. So even further back in time, thousands upon millions of years or however long, all this shit has existed. And he was this just, he was quiet but not foreboding, and he was contemplative, not withdrawn. And so he would constantly be, going around heaven, seeing everything, looking into. He had a special chalice, which I believe we now know is called Kaldir. I'm probably saying that wrong, and everyone will hark on me in the comments. But and he could actually see the connections between all things in creation, and so he could see how everything is connected. And so from that, he could make determinations about, what might be a good battle plan, because if you kill this guy, this particular demon, he's actually the leader of the squad or whatever. And so he would make all of the plans. And if there's ever any bickering or indecisions within the Anguirus Council, he would be the one that would make the deciding vote. Or, if he said something that they hadn't thought of, they'd always go along with it, because he was always right. He was the guy that knew best. But then there was an event happen, and you have this guy that cared about life, cared about heaven, was very quiet and contemplative, and even as another contrast is saying that his voice was melodious. So people, not people, but angels, all of heaven would stop whenever he would speak, and they would all listen and gain insight into what it is that he had to say. And then Anarius, the rogue angel, stole the World Stone. Stole in quotations from the Pandemonium Fortress, and that caused a change in Malthael. He suddenly became withdrawn. He wouldn't go out and interact with people. He would just stay within the pools of wisdom, and his demeanor began to darken. So instead of being inspirational, other angels began to just fear him. He had an aura of fear that would go about his being, and instead of being the deciding vote, he would actually abstain from votes. So people wouldn't even care what it is that he had to say anymore. So, and they don't actually go in to say, what it is that caused this, because the World Stone wasn't the source of his visions. It was the Chalice of Wisdom. So it's not so much, unless there is some unknown connection that fueled that the Chalice from the World Stone. There wasn't a direct correlation. So some of the other things that it speculates is that he saw the birth of the Nephalem before Sanctuary was ever discovered. And so he started seeing all of these new connections, and he became, troubled by it because he wasn't able to interpret it. That something out there is happening that he didn't know, that he couldn't understand. And so,
remember the start of this when I asked you to tell me the really brief version of his backstory?
This is it, right? This is the brief version.
So reeling it back in, so he said he was brooding and dangerous, and he vanished a long time ago, and now he suddenly reappears, just as we see in the cinematic, once Tyrael has gotten the Black Soulstone, and now Malthael is going to kill everyone except for the angels. That pretty much sums it up.
Wrap up.
And he does the whole thing where he steals Tyrael's memory of the time that he met the King of Hogwarts back in the old days, and he didn't like it, so then he spared him at the end.
Why did Tyrael's sword just pass through Malthael? Obviously a lot of people will say, oh, he's just that badass, he can't be touched. Well, again, going into lore, Tyrael's sword, Eldruin, can't harm things of righteous or just intent. And Malthael, as they said in a lot of the developer interviews, his intent of stealing the Black Soulstone and killing all of humanity is because he's trying to bring an end to the eternal conflict. He sees humans, the Nephalem, as half demons, which they are. And so it's their job as angels to kill them all, in addition to all of the demons. That's why when he, started pulling Tyrael's soul out, he noticed that it was different from those of the humans, and he kind of sucked his soul. That just sounds wrong, a little bit, and he got a taste for it and realized that, oh yeah, this is Tyrael, because Malthael disappeared before Tyrael ever forsaken his divinity, so he didn't know that he became mortal. He didn't recognize him, and then once he saw that he had no demonic essence in him, well, he just throws him off to the side because he has no beef with you. He just wants to kill the demons. He wants to, fulfill his duty as the leader of heaven, that their job is to kill demons. And so that's what he's doing. He's killing demons. And, the humans are half demon. So
once again, a legendary sword in Diablo 3 proves useless. So if Tyrael had a regular sword, he could have thrown down, right? He did okay then? It was only because he had the special legendary, which is probably 117 DPS.
He could have gotten,
Griswold's Edge, I get that one all the time.
From the Anvil of Fury, level 3 blue.
So yeah, speaking of the Horadrim, as we were told, I believe that Cain was the last of them, and he was training Leah to be the second to last of them or something. And then suddenly we get this cinematic, and Tyrael's got this massive underground fortress with a whole bunch of trained Horadrim. So where do these Horadrim come from? It's like the secret order that Cain didn't know about? Cain knows about everything.
It could be.
Is it a big, dirty
I'm sure
Metconned?
we'll probably see more of that in the Book of Tyrael coming out in October. But Tyrael was the person that created the original Horadric Order in order to fight the three primevals when they were banished to Sanctuary. So, I mean, it could just be easily that when he came to Sanctuary during the events of the Book of Tyrael, which takes place between Diablo III and Reaper of Souls, that he just created a new Horadric Order to take over. Yeah, or however
In
much
like a
time has
week.
passed.
And he dug that
Oh,
giant
I
pit
mean,
and built the temple in it.
we
And
don't know. Yeah, that probably is just going to be, some, say it's just going to be
it
some
was like an old
sandbox area
Kmart
that they
probably. They
just
just
pulled out and
refurbished
threw
it.
in there.
So are you still alive there, Azure? Do you have any insight into this
Dude,
stuff?
I do like the angel story. The one thing I wish they would do a bit more of is the nature of angels in D3 is a bit different to how they treated angels in D2. In D2, like the law's supposed to be that angels are really like it's all mythology. So like people don't actually know these, like there is demons and angels, and it's sort of like a bit of a like real sort of you know normal people who kind of like how we live. We don't necessarily know about angels or demons, and most people don't believe in them. And that's what I think D1 and D2 was kind of the law was surrounding that. Demons didn't actually exist as far as most people were concerned. It was sort of only a really secretive thing, especially the angels. But it looks like it's all out there now. So like angels are sort of everywhere and demons are everywhere. And I kind of liked the sort of secretiveness and elusiveness of like how angels were. They were sort of like mythological sort of beings. And I don't know. They obviously have to do what they're doing, but I would have liked a bit more subtlety in the way they tell their stories, especially when it comes to angels. Like it should be, you should barely ever see one in the entire story. So I don't know.
I would think
Yeah.
after the events of Act Two, then that like everybody in the world knows there are demons, given like the prince turned
Yeah.
into like a 6,000 foot tall green monster. Well, they mentioned about the story that angels are really unusual and you haven't seen them before. Then suddenly we're here in Westmarch and there's
Yeah.
angels just like killing
Yeah.
and undeading everyone in sight. So
Well, also, I
I think it's
mean
like an
that
escalation of events is
aspect,
the
at
idea.
least not for the player, but for the world itself, is still there because there's the exchange between the messenger and Tyrael in Act 3. When they request for reinforcements because they were being assaulted by the demons at a Bastion's Keep. That the king of Westmarch was like, "There's no such thing as demons. Fuck off." They weren't going to give any reinforcements because they. Exactly. Well,
I guess he'll find
he
out
won't believe
different,
in
huh?
demons. He sure as well believe in angels now, at least. Yeah, and then also just
Well,
look
they're
at
the
the people of
demonic angels,
Tristram
though.
didn't really so much. They thought that Leoric and Diablo and all that were just old wives' tales that people told of the area and such. So it's not news doesn't travel all that fast. In a medieval time, so people don't really so much believe the stories of stuff that happened 20 years ago. And the thing about Belial, I always had wondering about that. What is the true form of Belial? Was he actually the 6,000 foot tall creature? Or was just that what he projected, and only you got to see that? Because when he dies, the platform and everything reforms. So I think that was all just exactly. It was all just deceit
It
because
was
he
all in your
he was the
mind.
Lord.
What's going on with the Soulstone? The Black Soulstone, it fell. We were speculating where did it fall, and I think I actually said I think it just landed on a lower level in heaven, and apparently I was right by accident, and now it's this magical thing that's got all these demonic powers in it. So in theory, there's some way that Malthael can harness the power of Asmodean's spirit or something, and now he's going to be even more kick-ass than before. I wasn't aware that was like a
Yeah,
power
well,
source for
there
anyone. I thought it was
was
only for demons.
one of the lore books in Diablo 3, or it might have not been one of the lore books. One of the conversations with Zoltan Kulle saying that it could, that the Black Soulstone could contain the spirit of not just demons but angels as well. Uh, yes,
Ooh, that'd be
but
cool if you can put him in it now.
I guess at this point we really don't know what it's going to be used for, and it's all speculation. If I were to guess, just some of the things that they've hinted at in the gameplay demos, that they have the harbingers of death or whatever they were called, collecting souls of humans and putting them into these death orbs, which could be portals to the Pandemonium Fortress, and they're siphoning all of the Nephalem souls or human souls and putting them into the Black Soulstone, is trying to make his power level over 9,000, and then he's going to use that to unleash destruction and try to obliterate the burning hells and get rid of all the demons.
So is Bale and Mephisto's souls in the Black Soulstone?
Yes.
Okay. I've got a
Baal,
theory.
Mephisto, and Diriel and Duriel. All the 7 evils are in there.
So this is probably more of a fantasy than a theory, but it would be cool, like at the end, if the only way to stop sort of Malthael is for Diablo and Baal and stuff like that to like come out and kill him and stuff. That'd be cool.
Cool if we cracked it open and they were the ones that delivered the killing blow, or we had to team up with the demons in order to kill them. Though I do see something happening and they getting unleashed, all of them getting unleashed at the end of Reaper of Souls, and kind of acting as the segue into the next expansion, and where we'll go to hell and finally quotations kill off all of the evils. We'll see. Yeah.
The
Then they come
14th
back to
time,
life.
you finally put an end to evil. So the Pandemonium Fortress is where Act 4's town is in Diablo 2, and it's just this little tiny room with a fireplace and 2 NPCs, and there's a really cool long stairway that goes down to hell. So obviously it's a much bigger setting that we're going to see in Diablo 3. So what is the Pandemonium Fortress in the lore? I mean, it's this city that's not really angels, but it's not
Yeah,
really
it's
demons. It's kind of
the
in between the
Pandemonium
realms, or
Fortress
what?
has been retconned completely since we last saw it. It Metconned. It was in
Metconned.
Diablo 2. It was Heaven's last outpost at the gates of hell. It's now been created, or it's now been set up as it actually is a fortress that was created by Tyrael to house the World Stone, which is the cause and the center of the eternal conflict between angels and demons. They've always been fighting over the World Stone, and was just made it so that way as something defensible that they could fight off hell when they controlled the World Stone. And it sits in the realm of Pandemonium, which is kind of like it's described as just being a scar in existence. That's where the universe was created, the Big Bang, as it were. And so it just kind of is floating there, and it's been taken back and forth between the angels and the demons countless number of times over the eons, and so it's actually kind of gained the essence of both the angelic nature as well as the demonic essence into the infrastructure. So there'll be parts that are angelic, and then there are other parts that are demonic. So it's kind of a dual nature place, and it's supposed to be huge, and that even when it's taken over by one of the sides, there'll be aspects of it that are abandoned. And this is where Malthael has been for the past 20 years. He's been wandering around the Pandemonium Fortress, which was abandoned when the World Stone was destroyed, because it's like, well, there's no reason to actually go through and set up shop here anymore because it's gone. And that's just where he's been hiding out. So that's where my speculation was, that of course they already said that's where Malthael is at the end of Diablo 3, and so that's where it was kind of like that was a easy one, that Act 5 would take place at some point in Pandemonium. Will we finally get to see what came of the World Stone? Because at the prior BlizzCons they said you can't destroy it. You can't really destroy it, and that it never actually was taken from the Pandemonium Fortress. It was just hidden or veiled somehow, so where you couldn't see it while it was there, and it just was like an image projected in Sanctuary.
So that giant red
It's
thing
like
that Tyrael
it's like a
shattered at the end of
hologram.
Diablo 2 expansion, that wasn't really there.
Yes, and
It was like a
so
really big red
I
vine.
think that the World Stone is going to come back and is going to be maybe the plot twist, or is going to be central to the actual story in Malthael's plot. Once we discover it, so we might not really learn anything about its role or even its existence in the game until we actually get to playing it.
Hopefully, some holograms will clarify everything for us.
So most of the speculation for the expansion was Imperius and Magda, and we don't see any sign of them at all in this. Are we going to see them, you think?
Yeah,
Imperius is like
I
he's
actually
back
like
in the
that,
fold
because
now, it
I
seems
was
like.
expecting them, Imperius to be one of the bosses in Diablo 3, because it made it, him out to be this guy that, hates the Nephalem, hates humans, who wants to go through and destroy us all. So I kept expecting every time that you have one of those little things, is your party ready? And it had Imperius there on the, the accept screen, that, yeah, exactly. Oh, we're gonna fight him now.
Yeah,
No,
being a
he's
dick,
just
basically.
calling you names and then flying off.
Squeeze the
Coincident
feathers
with
out of
the
him.
trailer, it shows him back on the council arguing and being a dick with everyone, but still being a part of the council. So it looks like he at least has come around and is accepting of Tyrael as the Archangel of Wisdom. Otherwise, if he didn't, he wouldn't be there. So It looks like he might not be changing in his attitude so much, but at least he's accepting and isn't going to be a bad guy. There's definitely still going to be a very uh, easy connection between him and Malthael, because Malthael has no beef with angels. He just wants to end the eternal conflict, and Imperius obviously doesn't like Nephalem, and he hates demons just as much. So he could join forces and help out, and so he could be a sub boss throughout the game. Though I think it would be a better story if they don't take the easy route like that and have him, stand on Tyrael's side and stand with the Anguirus Council and their decision to support the Nephilim and humanity instead of going off and just being, a complete and total douche. That would be a better character development overall. Though, I mean, everyone probably wants to kill him at this point, so they might just throw it in just because. But that's just my feelings.
Okay, I said Magda. I meant Adria, obviously, and there's no sign of her. I don't even see that she would have a role really, because she was obviously helping Diablo, and now Diablo's been defeated. She's going to be laying low from humans and angels. Maybe she'll show up again in a future game. And can we really have a Diablo 3, a Diablo game where you don't fight demons? I mean, obviously there's some kind of smaller demons it looks like, but every one has been Diablo or Baal or then Diablo again, and all the other greater evils and primer evils and lesser evils and fourths of evils. And but no, it seems weird. Is there not going to be? You think are we going to get a plot twist? You think? Do you expect to see
I think,
some other demon suddenly appear on some side?
like I said, Mephisto, Baal, and Diablo, Black Soulstone will be destroyed, or something will happen to it, and they'll come out, and yeah, it was sort of like you said, it's going to be like a bit of a reset, I think, because I doubt the game's called Diablo. He's not going to die. Not going to stay dead for long.
They have said that we will fight demons, and there will be demons for us to fight, in this game. And they hinted at the possibility that we might fight, one of the evils. They haven't said, which one or how many. So, there definitely is, what Azzure is saying. There's some evidence to help support that. Now that the demons have found out that Malthael has Black Soulstone, they're assaulting the fortress now as well to try and get back, the evils, because they made it seem as if hell is nothing but chaos now that it's leaderless. So there could be some factions, trying to get their leaders back, and that you have to fight your way through them in order to get to Malthael, or you're in the middle of the combat between the agents of death and the demonic hordes. That could be pretty interesting.
But we've gone really long on story stuff, so I want to get the two last topics before we wrap this up. Transmog. This is where you can make your gear look like other gear, and it sounds like you'll be able to unlock different looks, maybe not just other gear, like special appearances you'll find. And this is a feature that's in World of Warcraft under the same name even. So how is that received in WoW?
It is incredibly
popular.
It was one of the most asked for features for very many years until it was finally added into the game. It's just something that people really like. They get attached to a particular item set or item look, and they feel bad that, well, I've got to replace it, in the name of having better looking or better stats over the aesthetics. But then there are people that would pull sets together just so that way they could walk around through town, looking how they wanted to look. So it's something that doesn't have any effect on gameplay, and it's just something that players want, because part of the game is about looking like a badass. And if you just happen to not like what the Archon set looks like or what those legendaries look like, and you like something else, like for the barbarians, I think it's like the second to last tier, I don't remember what it's called, but you look like Sauron, from Lord of the Rings. So that's one of my favorite sets, and the stats on all of that gear is of course complete and total garbage because it's like level 55. So it's just something to allow players to customize their look and play the game how they want, which isn't a bad thing. And then it's going to have reagent cost to it, which I think one of the things that they showed in the video is like a fiery brimstone and demonic essence. So it's something that will take some mats out of the economy, and it can act as a gold sink, which doesn't actually increase player power in any respect whatsoever. And I think as the only final thing that I'd like to add to that is in the most recent expansion in WoW is they added in the capability of getting items that are solely for cosmetic purposes, and they added in a bunch of challenges which are very, very hard, incredibly difficult. You just have to be really good at the game. You can't outgear it because it scales all the higher level gear down, and so it's something that you have to do with skill alone in order to beat these challenges. And then they give you a really badass looking armor set for the class that you do it with to show off, and that's the only way of getting it. So if you walk around, you're going to be one of the only few people on the server that has it, and everyone is going to know where it came from, and that you're a good player because you're wearing this. So that's something that they could do in Diablo 3. You were able to kill the Ubers on Monster Power 10, or something along those lines, and so it gives you a special set of gear.
Like completely sort of failed because they didn't.
Of course, this is all your description from WoW is useful, but that is a game where you can actually A, walk around towns, and B, tell what other people are wearing when you're not in game with them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you're in game with them, but there's a big game.
That's something I was hoping that they would fix in or add to this expansion, but unfortunately, the whole persistent world, everyone being in like a sort of in-game lobby, I would have loved that because it kind of solves so many issues that are currently in terms of social issues. The fact that you could walk up to somebody, you can inspect them, you can duel them, you can trade with them. And having that sort of hub, so they could assign a city like Chaldeum and have chat channels where there's 100 people and they're all in the same world. That to me would be such an elegant and a really, really good way of fixing several problems in one. I think to an extent, the reason I like that idea so much is that to an extent it actually makes the game a bit more fun, because when you achieve things like getting really good gear and getting really high level or high paragon, people can actually see you and can see the gear you've got, and you can sort of you'll be, even if you're not the one with the good gear, it's always fun to walk around and see what people are wearing. You might see some godly dude wearing the most amazing gear, and that's fun. That's something you can do in your downtime. You don't necessarily have to be just in a lobby by yourself or playing. You have that in between sort of area where you can just walk around and trade and that sort of stuff.
Or even just, you're going and you're farming Paragon levels, and all of a sudden, Barbarian joins your group, and he's all in pastels, dual wielding the transmogged rainbow swords, from Whimsyshire, going around, killing everything in Monster Power 8. That'd be a riot.
Just like in real life, it's not really fun to be rich and special unless you can rub other people's faces in the fact that you are rich and special. And that's coming soon to Diablo 3. So, final topic. Release date, estimate, and beta start date estimate. Obviously, they've said 2014 they're aiming for, and Josh in an interview said hopefully beta by the end of this year. What is your guess, Neinball? Beta will start when, and the release date is when?
I think we might be able to see, I've really been surprised by the fact that they're even, alongside the announcement saying that, coming 2014, and that a beta might be by the end of this year, is just, catching a lot of my expectations, off guard. Because before I had read any of that, I would have said, beta, quarter 3 of 2014, and then the game release, quarter 1, quarter 2 of 2015. But now it's looking more like we might see the beta quarter 1 and the game release quarter 3. Okay, let's say February for the beta, and then my birthday is in August, so let's say they're going to specifically target it for me, and they're going to release the game in August.
I have to say that I doubt the beta is going to be this year. I think they're probably going to try, but as usual, it sort of gets delayed. I think March next year we'll see a beta, and then we're going to see a release date probably about 6 months after that. So what's that like? September, October, the latest November, I think, next year for release.
Yeah, Muggs and Junior Mint both said beta late this year or very early next year, and release by July or August. So they were also swayed. It's almost as though people have never seen a Blizzard game released before. It's amazing. Every time they come out, this one's going to be new. It'll be different. This one will be sooner. And
I just can't see them actually releasing the beta this year, because the BlizzCon comes out in November. And they always take the last all of the developers are gone for the last 2 or 3 weeks in December, and you have the Thanksgiving holidays and stuff like that. So you have a 2-week release window to go through and launch the beta between BlizzCon the aftermath of BlizzCon, and then the beginnings of all of their vacations, and then there's not going to be anyone there to manage, any of the updates or anything like that. So they're going to release it in its first form, and then let it sit there for a month and a half until halfway through January before anyone's even back to patch or fix anything. I don't see that happening. So I think that they're definitely going to wait until early next year at the soonest.
In theory, there's urgency to get V109 done also. I mean, people
Yeah.
have been crying for content for Diablo 3 forever, and they're going to get the whole Paragon 2.0 and Loot 2.0 and stuff in the
Mhm.
I think
actual
that'll be
game,
towards
not
the
just
end
in the
of
expansion.
development
So
because they're not going to release that before they've got everything down solid, like in the expansion.
they could experiment with Paragon stuff. But they're going to do it at some point in normal. Everyone wants content. Remember how people were so pissed? No content till after BlizzCon? And now you're saying no content till next
Yeah.
July? I don't know about that. Okay, you've been listening to the Diablo podcast. We are online at diabloinkgamers.com, and we will have another show at some point. Hopefully before BlizzCon, we'll have something
Moo.
else to talk about. And moo.
Moo, 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 moo.
Moo.
Oh.
Moo.